Good morning, I'm Charles Kuralt, and this is Sunday Morning. Have you noticed? Suddenly you don't have to be Irish to succeed in politics. Among the stars of the Democratic Convention this month were Geraldine Ferraro and Mario Cuomo. We haven't had very many names ending in vowels up there on the national podium, but Italian Americans are saying now it's our turn. Bob Pierpoint will report our cover story.
A century ago, Italians began coming to America by the millions, but they have never achieved national political power. Now, in 1984, they have gained sudden prominence. Later on Sunday morning, we'll explore the new importance of Italian Americans in national politics.
I saw a blue whale once by surprise in the Bering Sea. And half an hour later, my heart was still beating fast. A blue whale is unimaginably huge, the largest creature that has ever lived on Earth. But after centuries of whale hunting, they are few and far between, and they need looking after. With David Culhane this morning, we will revisit some whales and some people who are looking after the leviathans. Wilma's Winning Ways is a winning story from Robert Lipsyte.
Whatever happened to Wilma Rudolph? At the 1960 Olympic Games at Rome, she stunned the sports world by winning 3 gold medals. The next 24 years were not always kind. But Wilma Rudolph is back in the arena now, and we'll talk to her later on Sunday Morning.
David Smith was a man of steel. From steel, he made powerful sculpture. As Haywood Hale Brun says in his look back at David Smith, his sculpture did not demand that you liked it, but it demanded that you look at it. And we will. Ron Powers finds that the Great Miss America flap tells us more about us than about her. Ray Brady will be in to talk about the good economic news of the week. Gross national product way up, inflation down. And as usual, we'll review the major news of the week. And we'll begin right now with some of the news headlines for Sunday morning, the 29th of July. Fred Waring died last night after suffering a stroke at his home in State College, Pennsylvania. With his clean-cut choral group, the Pennsylvanians, Fred Waring recorded hundreds of popular songs, and he also developed and marketed the Waring Blender. Olympic competition begins today in Los Angeles with events in swimming and cycling and weightlifting and basketball. In opening ceremonies last night, Rayford Johnson, a hero of the Olympics of 1956 and 1960, became the first black American to light the Olympic torch. President Reagan, after officially opening the games, went to his ranch in Southern California. He will vacation there for the next 19 days.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't make the jacket. Sorry. With a left like...
Just 1 or 2 empty desks in your accounting or bookkeeping department.
Deficit and the fairness issue. She said Mr. Reagan misleads voters when he says he won't raise taxes.
I think he's going to have to. And I think the question comes down to how do you do it fairly?
I have no plans for a tax increase.
President Reagan said that, but at a news conference and in a speech, he seemed to leave the tax door open.
Thank you. If and when we bring government spending down, and then at that bottom level, that still is above what our tax system is bringing in revenues, yes, then we would have to look and make those two balance.
Walter Mondale went fishing last week. War in space is still just a theoretical possibility. The Soviet Union charged last week that the United States' attitude is making it impossible to hold talks to outlaw outer space war, talks proposed for September. A White House spokesman said the United States is willing to meet without preconditions. In Chicago last week, the federal government came to the rescue of Continental Illinois National Bank. It provided $4.5 billion, most of which will go to covering the bank's bad loans. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation said it acted to prevent a collapse of that bank and a major crisis in the banking system. The economy was a big issue in the elections in Israel, where inflation is now 400% per year. The vote was supposed to provide a clear new direction for Israel. Instead, it was inconclusive. Neither the Likud party of Prime Minister Shamir nor the Labor Party of Shimon Peres received a majority. One politician, Zip Shavitz, had this analysis.
Israelis are a nation of complainers. And the average complaint that we make, I mean, the way that we complain is to blame the government for everything. And this is really the first time in history that I can remember that everybody woke up this morning without anyone to blame.
I must relinquish my title as Miss America.
Vanessa Williams gave up her crown. Penthouse magazine, with suggestive nude pictures of her, went on sale. That issue is expected to gross $4 million more than usual.
Political forecasting has...
George Gallup died. He was 82. His Gallup poll became a respected harbinger of American attitudes and predictor of elections.
Anyone ever told you that you overplay your various roles rather severely, Mr. Captain?
Field Marshal Rummel speaking.
Don't ever forget how good you are. Hang on to that.
James Mason died.
Yes, I'm right.
He was 75. Whether he played hero or villain in his 100 films, James Mason was never less than suave.
Hey. I just want to take another look at you.
This portion of Sunday Morning is sponsored by Post Fruit and Fiber in 2 varieties, dates, raisins, and walnuts, or apples and cinnamon.
Something's new about that cereal.
Delicious.
Love the apple. Now there's even more apple. That's why it's called Post Fruit and Fiber cereal tastes so good, you forget the fiber. Crispy, high-fiber flakes, now with 25% more apple. Slices of golden dried apple, plus cinnamon. So all you remember is...
Fruit. Fruit and,
How many letters? Now Fruit and Fiber has 25% more apple. It tastes so good, you forget the fiber.
Make it with fresh strawberries, sliced bananas, and juicy grapes. Make it Jell-O, gelatin, create a sensation.
Aha! It's a sneak attack on my Jell-O gelatin fruit snack.
Try the new speed set method. Just add ice cubes in cold water to Jell-O. Add bananas, chill, and it's ready in about half an hour.
Terrific! Make it Jell-O, gelatin, create a sensation. Shake it out.
John Houseman for the investment firm of Smith Barney.
Chippendale, made by hand. You can't mass-produce good investment advice either. You can't slap a label on it and ship it out. Investing is personal, as much art as science. At Smith Barney, they know this in their bones. Things well made are worth more. Smith Barney. They make money the old-fashioned way. They earn it.
This heart operation will cost over $7,000 for surgery, over $8,000 for hospital bills, over $1,200 for anesthesiology, but only $4.60 for the electricity that makes it all possible. What else gives you so much for so little? But like anything you buy, electricity's value depends on how and where you choose to use it. Electricity, it's the power of choice.
Presidents don't usually make it to neighborhood festivals. But if the festival is the Feast of St. Anne, Mother of Mary, patron saint of women, and if most of the people who are there are Italian Americans, well, in that case, a president might try to make it after all. Italian Americans are saying it's our turn now. Bob Pierpoint reports our Sunday morning cover story.
Look who's at an Italian-American church festival in Hoboken, New Jersey, playing hardball against the Democrats.
I'm very happy to be here at your 74th festival in honor of St. Anne. You are the people who keep America going, who make America happen every day.
15 to 20 million Italian Americans are no longer just another source of votes. Now they are a source of political leadership in the presidential election itself.
In a book or learn in a classroom, I saw it and lived it like many of you. I watched a small man with thick calluses on both his hands work 15 and 16 hours a day. I saw him once literally bleed from the bottoms of his feet, a man who came here uneducated, alone.
Italian Americans are big on the national political scene this year. Finally. More than 2 centuries after this nation began electing its leaders, another ethnic group is coming into its own. Italian Americans are proud of their new prominence, as they are proud of their heritage. Listen to New York Governor Mario Cuomo speak of his immigrant parents at the Democratic Convention this month.
I learned about our kind of democracy from my father, and I learned about our obligation to each other from him and my mother. They asked only for a chance to work and to make the world better for their children.
They were listening to Cuomo all over America. Italian Americans in Cranston, Rhode Island were listening.
I think Mario Cuomo was just super. I really did. And I think everyone feels that, even non-Italian.
Listen to Geraldine Ferraro, the Democratic vice presidential candidate, the first woman and the first Italian American to run on the ticket of a major party.
Tonight, the daughter of a woman whose highest goal was a future for her children talks to our nation's oldest party about a future for us all. Tonight, the daughter of an immigrant from Italy has been chosen.
Italian-American voters in Cranston, Rhode Island were listening.
It's going to put the Italians on the map in this country, let's put it that way, you know. And it finally had to happen, a woman, you know, a woman getting there. And as far as I'm concerned, if it's going to be a woman, thank God it's an Italian, you know. That's how I feel about it.
If you work hard and play by the rules, you can earn your share of America's blessings. Those are the beliefs I learned from my parents.
The parents, the grandparents, they came to America by the millions from Italy. Most of them came from the impoverished areas of the South, where a repressive government and a restrictive church had taught them never to trust outsiders. They had been preceded by other ethnic groups that were already assimilating and gaining political acceptability.
Quelli che sono nati con questa fede e devozione nel nostro sangue.
They believed in America, but they did not encourage their children to enter the murky waters of American politics.
Per la madre di noi tutti, Maria, la madre di Cristo.
That immigrant generation, the Depression generation, has a security complex. They're concerned about anything that puts you up front in controversy where you might get hurt. My mother doesn't like a business where whatever you do, you're making part of the people unhappy. She doesn't like that. You know, don't fight, eat a piece of fruit, be nice. I mean, what do you have to argue with people?
When I went to Italy the last time, let me see, how many, 7 years ago? Really? And I came back, I said, thank God we're in America.
Most of the Italians who migrated to America settled on the East Coast. They came to work in the factories and foundries. They helped build cities like Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, and Providence, Rhode Island. They eventually helped elect mayors, governors, and members of Congress. But they still lacked political clout at the White House and at the national party level. In 200 years, presidents have chosen only 4 men with Italian names for cabinet posts: Volpe, Celebresi, Califano, Civiletti, and none to the Supreme Court. there were and are enormous problems in gaining political acceptability outside the Italian-American enclaves.
Can't think of a thing, really. Some do have to do with the name factor. In states, especially, where you're not used to that name, it's just difficult to break that stereotype.
Michael Kramer is a political analyst and writer.
And people like to be prejudiced about something. And if you push them, oftentimes they're not really prejudiced. They wouldn't deny an Italian-American his right to do X, Y, or Z thing. But in the voting booth, it's kind of an easy way to separate yourself. But when it comes to putting themselves on the line in running for public office, it's a whole other matter, and then they're typecast again as Italian-American for whatever that's worth. And in many instances, it's not worth enough.
Oh, I fell short. I fell short.
Okay, that's my point.
My mother and father were immigrants. My mother came over here with her brother when she was 10 years old with a nameplate around her neck.
Congressman Silvio Conte of Massachusetts entered politics as a Republican because the Irish dominated the Democratic Party. As a young politician, he found what it meant to run as an Italian-American.
I remember the first time I ran for the state senate, I had a little blotter. And on it, I had my picture of myself and my wife and 3 children. And I didn't know too much about politics, and I had a statesman, not a politician. And I went up to Williamstown, and I walked into there's a town up north of here, and I walked into a grocery store and a clothing store on a Saturday afternoon. And the fellow that owned the clothing store shook my hands. I said, I'm Silvio Conte. I'm running for the state senate. And he looked at me and he said, boy, I'm glad you came in here. He says, I had pictured you as a dark, greasy wop, he said.
I yield the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Conte.
Silvio Conte overcame discrimination and has so far served 26 years in Congress.
I now declare
Other Italian-American politicians broke barriers.
64 Democratic National Convention to be in order and open for business.
John Pastore of Cranston, Rhode Island, a Democrat, was the first son of Italian immigrants to win a state governorship. That didn't happen until after World War II. He went on to become the first Italian-American to sit in the U.S. Senate. Do you think that Ms. Ferraro will attract women votes and Italian-American votes because she's an Italian-American woman?
She will get a lot of Italo-American votes because of pride. In the beginning, that happened to me. I know a lot of Italo-American Republicans who voted for me, merely out of a sense of pride.
Italian-Americans in Cranston also have pride in their heritage. Every year they celebrate the Feast of St. Mary with a street ceremony brought over from the old country.
Easy, Mom. Okay.
There was added reason for pride this year. Italian-Americans are big in national politics, finally. You could sense the pride along the parade route. You could hear it at the backyard family picnics after the parade.
We think it's great. We think it's the year for the Italians.
You could hear it at the home of Pasquale and Mary Manzi, who came to this country in the early 1920s, raised 4 children, and today see their great-grandchildren enjoy the bounties of America. Gina D'Amore is the Manzi's granddaughter.
I'm glad he picked a woman.
You are?
Why? Because I think they broke through that 200-year gap. I think they like they do with the blacks now. They're finally getting through on. She's more or less like a minority.
I don't want to say anything bad about it. I think the place for that job should be a man. Woman is all right. I think she belongs more in the house than into the politician like that, a big job. I vote for him.
They can do a good job, too.
They give you the orders.
Women can do a good job better than the men can do.
That's
Give
a
him a
man of
chance.
the department.
I mean, give him a chance.
It's not unlike Jack Kennedy. You know, people will look at her, if she does well, the fact that she's a woman, the fact that she's an Italian-American, the fact that she has gray hair will all recede, and people will look at her and say, oh, that's a smart person, and I wouldn't mind having her in office or having him in office. And that's when the stereotype breaks down.
The stereotype of the Italian-American is breaking down as the second and third generations assimilate. Many still enjoy the old traditions, the music, the food, the religious practices. But nowadays, the younger Italian-Americans observe them in their own ways. The accent is less on Italian, more on American. Political analyst Michael Kramer.
Cuomo, the interesting thing will be to see that if after Mrs. Ferraro and after Governor Cuomo, whether younger sons and daughters of Italian Americans come late to this process and enter politics in a big way and eventually come to play an increasingly predominant role on the national scene.
Former Senator Pastore is confident that time is coming.
I think it's going to happen irrespective even of Geraldine Ferraro, because as people become more involved in these American society, things are changing. You see, we're now in the second and the third generation of Italo-Americans. They speak English in these homes. A lot of them have been educated. They're cultured. They have a tremendous tradition, you see.
I wouldn't vote for her just... No. I'm glad she's on the ticket, but I wouldn't vote for her just because she's a woman.
It takes a while for those generations to make themselves sufficiently affluent and secure so that they can express themselves. And if you see the history of our politics, you see that the Irish came first and moved into positions of power before the Italians, and it's directly in proportion to the time they got here. So it's a matter of evolution in a way, and now our turn is approaching.
Our turn. That's what a lot of Italian Americans are saying as they watch Geraldine Ferraro run for the vice presidency. Republican Congressman Silvio Conte is watching.
It all depends now on what she does in the next 100 days, how she conducts herself, what kind of a campaign, and they're all just sitting on the edge of their chair saying, I hope she does good. And I'm sure of that, whether the Republicans or Democrats. If she doesn't, well, then she's going to be a big disappointment. But at least she's broken the ice, and you're going to hear from others in the future.
So as she moves into uncharted territory, Geraldine Ferraro's message to women could just as well appeal to Italian Americans.
There are no doors we cannot unlock. We will place no limits on achievement. If we can do this, we can do anything.